Corbolic V2. This is a super safe and effective natural anabolic. Not only is this product going to help you increase protein synthesis, which basically means muscle recovery and growth, it also may inhibit myostatin, which is a protein in your body that is known to inhibit muscle growth. This is a complete natural anabolic that works through multiple different pathways, has multiple trademarked ingredients. If you are a natural athlete looking for that edge, Corbolic V2 is what you need. Get yourself some.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Pro Physique Code. First of all, we got Evan and we got Lexi and we got myself, and we're going to talk about some bikini prep stuff today. But Lexi, I gotta ask you a question. On the YouTube, and I don't remember, maybe in last week's podcast we said to say this, but there's so many comments that say we love Lexi.
Oh, you told them to say that.
That's right.
Did I?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, no,
If you're still listening at this point, then say we
you
love Lexi.
said
Yeah.
at the very end of the
Oh, that's good because there's a lot of them.
I know, it was like a little dopamine hit yesterday. I was like going and looking at them and responding. But yes, you told the people to comment, we love Lexi. It was like the last 5 seconds. You said, if you're still listening, comment, and then we'll know you're still here.
Well, I want to tell everybody right at the start of this that we are planning the next Command the Stage. I think we're going to plan it for March because they did move the Arnold up into February. It's like February 20 something now. So last year we did it at the end of February. This year I think we're going to do it middle of March. So we're going to be doing it at Brett Contreras's gym. We're all going to be there. So this week's YouTube video, guys, right now, comment below if you're interested in attending an event with all of us. I'll have a Bikini Pro work on posing. I'll have Brett help us with our training. We're going to do a couple seminars. And of course, we're going to be social. We're going to have like a couple dinners and things like that. It's going to be in Fort Lauderdale in March, which, hey, 80 degrees and no humidity in March in Fort Lauderdale is a nice time.
That is.
Yes.
So comment below if you want to come to the Command the Stage, if you're interested, because we are going to be, I just made a hire. We have hired, I'm very excited about this, our first ever professional event planner. Right?
Ooh.
Yeah. So we have a professional event planner. So yeah, things are about to get real this year. Very excited.
Exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't wait for Command the Stage. Brett's gym. Well, I haven't been there yet. That will change this weekend, but I know it's incredible.
Well, he just added like maybe another 1,500 square feet. The space next to him opened up, so he blew that wall out, took that over. So now it's pretty cool. Like he's got, like when you're training there, you can say, like, I've been saying this to my athletes. I don't know if I did it in the video. Do one lift in this area. So it's all the, like, let's say squat variations. You know, you've got the pit shark, you've got the leg press, the hack squats, right? Do one lift in this area. It's all the hamstring equipment. And then you do one lift in this area. It's the hip thrust. And then you do one lift in this area and it's all the abduction, right? So it's almost like you can just go through and do a workout because he's got so much variety.
Yeah, I'm excited to check it out this weekend. I'm like, okay, I'm probably going to want to be there for like 3 hours just trying everything out. So yeah, it looks like a really neat setup.
We'll bust out your camera, record a little bit, and then we'll and you and I are going to meet up and train in Tampa, not this week because of the Ben Weider show I'm leaving for, but next week.
Yes.
And we'll do some glute training, and I think we'll probably meet at, well, are we going to go to Gold's Gasworks or are we going to go to Optimum?
I think we decided on Optimum just because it's kind of the equivalent to like a Brett Contreras gym in Tampa. Granted, it's not as big, but he has so many like pieces of glute equipment. So anybody listening, if you're ever in Tampa, Optimum Gym, it's kind of a little hole in the wall because it doesn't look like much from the outside, but he has so many different glute machines.
Yeah.
Like he has like 5 different hip thrust machines, 5 different abduction machines. Like it's a cool place.
Yeah, if you're in the Tampa Bay area, it's kind of centrally located because you can get to it from St. Pete or Tampa. It's kind of right there near both. You got to go over the bridge if you're in St. Pete, but it's right over the bridge.
Yeah, and it's not far from the airport too. So if you're wanting like a reference point, I mean, it's probably 10 minutes at most from the airport. It's really close.
Yeah. So, and then also Derek Lunsford, 2023 Mr. Olympia, messaged me and invited us to bring our team to his new gym that he just opened up, and I think it's over there in Feather Sound in St. Pete. So yeah, so we'll definitely document that. I want to go support Derek. He's been awesome. Yeah, so good things coming up. And we haven't announced like our meetup, but I still want to do a meetup. I think once I get through this Ben Weeder weekend, I can pick a
Yeah.
time.
You have a
Be great.
very busy weekend coming up because you're going to be in several spots at once, and I'm really excited. I just looked at so there's obviously Ben Weeder, Atlantic Coast, and then there's the Hawaii, the Sean Ray Hawaii Pro this weekend. So there's 3 big pro shows, and the lists are out for those. So that's exciting to see.
Did Ashley go to Hawaii?
No, she's not.
Oh, okay.
Ashley Kate.
Yeah, she's done that in the past. She's done that show.
Oh, no, she's not on that list. She just got back, so she had her 50th pro win this past weekend. Not this weekend, so like a little.
Yeah, it was in Kazakhstan.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know what her plans are now.
I had to look that up on a map, you know, and it's in the middle of nowhere, Russia. Like it's way in.
I know. I had to look it up too because I was like, I tend to think I'm decent with geography, but that is definitely a place I did not really know where that was at. So yeah, it's
I
kind of
think that's where Borat is from.
That's what that's what I thought, first thought that went to my head.
That's what everyone thought.
Yeah.
Kazakhstan.
yeah, it's gonna
The
be
running of the Jew.
it's
Well,
gonna be a big weekend for you, especially Paul, being in so many different spots because you're going from Ben Meter and then you're coming down to Fort Lauderdale to kind
Yeah, I think I've done this multiple times now. Because the Ben Weeder's on Friday, and then I get the first flight from DC to Fort Lauderdale on Saturday. So I get in Saturday at like 10 a.m. So I'll catch the NPC show on Saturday. They don't actually have the pro show till Sunday and the natural show. So I have athletes in all 3 of those events. So I have Masters Pro, Open Pro, NPC, and Natural NPC. So it'll be a fun weekend, and I have really excited about the Ben Weeder. This is the best Lana Dunbar has ever looked. This is the best Brittany Schulman has ever looked. I looked at that list, and I have to be honest, I didn't recognize any other names, that I thought were going to be contenders. That doesn't mean anything because I don't follow every single competitor, but so I fully expect they'll be in the mix there. So that's going to be exciting.
Yeah, I'm excited to see that. I think it would be awesome if they're like top 2 battling it out. Obviously, it kind of sucks because they can't, but both of them can't win. But I think that would be really cool to see them in the top 2.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. But then this year, and I'm excited to see Tyler Mannion and talk to him about the year ahead with the natural shows, because there are going to be multiple pro Olympia qualifiers for next year, right? It's not just going to be the one. As far as I know, I don't want to misspeak, but that's the way I understand it. So it'd be cool to see what happens with that side of it. And yeah, and we're going to do a podcast about the landscape of the sport in regards to the natural side of it, just to update people, because I think right now it's kind of an unknown, even for someone like myself that has quite a few athletes in that realm. It's still hazy to me. I know the NPC and the IFBB like the back of my hand, right? The natural stuff, I'm hearing things, and I'm going to websites. I only just realized there's 2 pro cards this year at the Ben Weeder. They've never done that before. I had to go to the website to confirm that. Someone said that to me, and I'm like, oh, they are doing it. Like the Arnold, the top 2 in the overall.
Now, I've actually probably got 5 or 6 DMs in the last day from clients and potential clients asking questions about the natural side of the NPC.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting development, and I'm here for it. I think everyone kind of hesitates when something new comes out until it's a little bit more established. But I think with the history of the NPC and how they've grown over the last couple 10 years or so, it's been by being more inclusive, not by being exclusive. When I first got into the sport, it was men did bodybuilding, women did figure and bodybuilding. Then they added these new divisions. First they added men's physique, then they added bikini. At the same time they added those, and everybody was like, this is stupid, I'm not going to this show. Well, it's probably doubled the size of and maybe more, the size of the sport, maybe more. I don't even know. I would be curious to know how many NPC cards they sold annually. And for those that aren't familiar, the card is what you have to buy to compete. You have to register with the NPC. Then you have to pay the local promoter for the show. So how many national NPC cards did they have in 2008? 7 or 8 was the last year. I think they introduced bikini and men's physique in 2009. I could be wrong. Or maybe it was 2010. But so like versus where it got to at its peak, I got to imagine it's at least doubled, if not tripled. So, and you've just seen an explosion in show size. So now you take that and you go, okay. I will say this. So there was a natural show in Orlando this weekend. There were more athletes at that show than there were at any NPC show I've been to this year.
Wait, you mean Tampa
Tampa?
weekend?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay, you said Orlando. Oh, the
Mhm.
Tampa OCB show this
Yep.
yeah.
That there was over 140 athletes competing there,
Wow.
like individual athletes. So I know that's more than Hurricane had. I know that's more than Ultimate Grand Prix. I think that's more than they had. Trying to think.
Also, I think it's a benefit too because there's not near as many of those shows in Tampa
That's true.
or anywhere
That's
around.
true.
So
They're
it's
not. They're
gonna
not. They're not
attract-
fighting each other for people.
Yeah, that
And
cannibalizing where there's a show every other weekend.
I think what you're going to see, we've already seen some changes in the number of shows. They're kind of, changing. So I think there could be a decrease in the number of shows, just from the economics of the sport, smaller shows, more expensive venues, the lighting, the venue, all that stuff adds up.
So they
So
cannibalize each other.
right. And, yeah. So, when
It,
right after the COVID stuff, I think the sport had an explosion, and I think maybe some promoters got a little bit too excited and added too many shows. I don't know.
yeah, I'm interested to see what the natural side does for things too, if it's going to complement or cannibalize it. I don't know which one it's going to do, or if people are going to do both, or how that's going to work. It'd be interesting.
Yeah, I'm
to
a
see.
little bummed, so this weekend is, technically this is the biggest natural event, the Ben Weider. And then Sunday, you have a natural show in Florida in Fort Lauderdale. I feel like that's going to hurt Tim's show because, not for nothing, all of my natural competitors are going to the Ben Weider. I only have one girl doing the natural show. So, and that for her was she couldn't afford to travel to Ben Weider.
Yeah.
So that's the reason that she's not doing the Ben Weider. But yeah, so that's kind of where I come from, is like, okay, exactly. You don't want to be pulling from the same pool of people.
And I mean, I have a girl that's competing at the Ben Weir this weekend. That if not, she'd probably have done the one in Lauderdale.
Right. Makes sense. So I'll be curious to see all of it. It's all learning, so yeah. So let's get into some of these questions, because I know we've been doing some Q&As. We've gotten a lot of questions, and we've answered a lot of the questions, but I feel like there's still some stuff not addressed. And to be fair, if you guys are listening and you're on YouTube, we read the comments and we take notes, and that's what this first question is about.
Yeah, so and this is a question, there was a comment on a recent video that we put out with this question, but I've gotten this question before. And it's, basically we can kind of approach this from a couple of different viewpoints, but this question basically stems from this person wanting to know if, as coaches, we find that it's very different, like prepping a younger competitor versus an older competitor. So let's say, prepping somebody who's 22 versus 52, right? Like, is there a difference that we notice in those two types of clients, in how we approach their preps, in their body's responses? So that's kind of what we're going to start off talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I can start off with this one. I think it has more to do with how much muscle and how long you've trained, more necessarily than your age. Now, typically, people that are in the masters division are a little bit older, have been training for a longer time, which means they could typically handle more food. They don't require as much cardio because they have more muscle mass. Now, with that being said, I have coached some masters competitors that are newer to training, and they're much more like coaching someone that's like 21, 22 that hasn't had enough time in the gym yet. So there's a lot of similarities there, but I think most of the masters competitors that I coach, they typically can handle more food, less cardio, and much easier to get in condition, but that's just due to the fact they have way more years of training under them.
Yeah, I think a big thing too, like I would agree with all of that. I think being older, especially if you've lived this lifestyle for, 10 plus years, you have just that muscle maturity, and you don't usually have to work as hard to maintain that. But I also see on the flip side of things, especially like older athletes tend to have, especially if we're talking like right now, mid 40s, 50s, like those females generally come from a generation where dieting and extreme diets was very, very prevalent. So I tend to find that people of that age, not everybody, but they have a lot more of like an extensive dieting history. And definitely that can be something that can kind of make it a little bit harder to get a good response in prep compared to, let's say, somebody who's super young and prep is their first diet that they've ever put their body through, right? Because like I remember the first prep I did, arguably the first diet I ever put my body through, honestly wasn't that difficult. But the more you rack up that dieting history, then you just have to be more strategic and take more time away from dieting if you expect your body to continue to respond in every diet you do furthermore.
Yeah, I think the biggest difference I typically notice in a master's competitor and a younger competitor, and it's not always the case, but the far majority, master's competitors have figured out life. They've gone through jobs, moving, they've established who they are, they're not insecure. Younger athletes tend to make competing their entire identity. There's a lot more ups and downs. They get caught up in the comparison game. They're more likely to be dealing with relationship stress, life stress, and as you should be in your 20s, like you're still like, figuring out who you are and what you want to do. I often say, I did my first bodybuilding show at 32 and I couldn't have done a show in my 20s. I was too inconsistent with life to be consistent in the gym. It wasn't until I had a career and I was kind of like in this pattern of like, oh, I am being really consistent. Maybe I could conceive doing a show. So I think women typically mature in that regard a little earlier. They get like, let's be fair, Lexi, you've been a grandma since college. But I would say the majority of athletes that are in their 40s or 50s are more established and they're more just, you don't have to worry about getting an email like, hey, coach, I can't do prep now because me and my boyfriend broke up and I have to move. Like I've gotten that a lot of times.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. More stability usually with the older clients, not all the time, but a lot of times, yeah, more stable with relationships, with their jobs, with like financially too. And not that this is always the case, but I feel like this just comes with age and maturity. But like, usually older clients are able to think a little bit more logically rather than so emotionally. I feel like, and then again, I think this is just a maturity thing, but sometimes when you are younger and you're not as mature, it's easier to act on emotion and not logic, which a lot of times doesn't get you in a good spot. So, but I would say when it comes to the actual like prep approach, because I think people always wonder, as coaches, do we have to prep our younger versus our older clients differently? I would arguably say no. Nothing is really different with the approach. Sometimes with the older athletes, I mean, recovery can be something we have to stay a little bit more on top of because their body isn't recovering as it did when they were in their 20s. But if we're talking very generally, I would say the actual prep approach at hand is not different, whether it's a 20-year-old or a 50-year-old.
It's all, I mean, prep is prep and diet is dieting, right? Just I think it kind of goes back to how much muscle do you have? How much time have you trained? I think a lot of that boils down to that. And then the emotional maturity, I think, is, a big part of it as well. I can say I don't get near as many, not that I dissuade my clients were ever asking questions or anything like that, but more just kind of logical things. Like if their weight doesn't spike for like a day, they don't freak out, right? They're like, hey, that's fine. It's happened before. When, some of my younger clients will feel like it's the end of the world if something like that ends up happening. So yeah, I think it's just time and experience more than anything, and that's just kind of life in general, right? For most people with that. Now, granted, I have some masters competitors that are not like that at all, that are very much still emotionally reactive, but I would say it's far, far less. And that's not necessarily a good or a bad thing either. Like it's about the experiences they've had, right? So if they're newer to the sport and they haven't really done this before, then they're more likely to be a little bit emotional about it because, and look, there's no reason not to be, right? If you're a new competitor and you're putting a lot into this and you don't know what's happening, you want to make sure you're doing everything you can with that. So I think it's age and the time that you've been doing it. So a little combination of everything. I got some young athletes too that it's like their second prep ever. And I'm like, how are you handling this so well? you know? Um, So I think it has a lot to do with the personality type and the muscle that people have.
Yeah,
Yeah.
my approach with athletes, the philosophy doesn't really change, right? Now, if they're giving me feedback that something's off, I'll adjust it, but I don't necessarily go, "Oh, this person's 50, I have to treat them different." If anything, like you said, Evan, the athletes that done multiple shows, I don't have to worry about them at post show as much, right? Um, I think most competitors, the first couple times they compete, they really look forward to that post show experience of like not tracking and gorging themselves for a while. Most of my masters competitors, one of their big concerns is like, hey, I want to come out of this show and stay healthy mentally and physically. So, I'm very conscious of that. Um, you know, I'll oftentimes have competitors that I know when the season ends, they're younger, they're going to disappear and they're going to struggle, and I try to set them up for that. But yeah, I think that comes from the inexperience, and you almost like, as someone who has kids, I say this all the time. You can tell your kid, watch out, you're going to hit your head. Watch out, you're going to hit your head. Once they hit their head, that's when they learn, right? That's when they learn to duck. You can tell them all you want. It's the experience, it's the pain. So doing a show, coming out of it, eating like a jerk, being unhappy and unhealthy, you learn from that and you don't want that pain again. Um, so not everyone, but I will say masters competitors who have done multiple shows, there's less ups and downs with competing. They're going into shows and they're coming out of shows. And I even noticed it with myself last year. I did a show. I mean, we went out to dinner after, but I didn't even have any alcohol. I just wanted to hang out with my friends. Whereas like my first show, I severely remember like, I cannot wait to drink, so.
There's an old saying, it's like you either learn the hard way or the harder way,
Right.
right? But that's typically what it takes, is learning the hard way before we learn any lessons. Because if there's no accountability or there's no repercussions for our actions, why would you change them?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
someone made I was training with John Hansen yesterday. Me and John did a YouTube video at Powerhouse, and we were talking about athletes post show staying leaner. And he's like, "Well, back when I was competing, there was no social media, there was no internet, so no one cared. No one cared what you look like." I think now we do have a little bit of pressure, like after a show, to not just kind of completely go off the radar. And I think for some athletes, that can be a problem.
I
Um,
was actually just going to bring up the idea of social media too, because I was, I'm curious if like younger athletes, because I mean, not to say that older athletes don't have social media, because a lot of them do, but some of them just aren't as active on social media. I'm almost wondering if just with the younger generation, I feel like they're a lot more invested in social media. They care a lot more about, the likes, the engagement. So I'm almost wondering if that has a lot to do too with like the pressure that sometimes they feel post show, that they have to kind of live up to. I don't know.
100%. I
Yeah, but it's kind of weird, right? Are you guys saying that's the pressure is the reason they crack and don't handle post show quite as well? Because you would think if it's the pressure to be able to handle it, it wouldn't be as big of an issue as it is. It's
Yeah.
not that's a big issue, because I'm not saying it's not. Like, I would say the vast majority of my clients handle it very, very well, right?
Well, but how many
But a
how
lot
many
don't.
this is something that every now and then I'll go on YouTube and I'll type in like, I like to watch people that I've never seen them before. I'll go on and watch their like prep vlogs, right?
Yeah, it's interesting, right?
And I'll watch them and they'll post every week for 6 months up to their show, and then they are ghosts. You
Mhm.
don't ever see them post again. And I know why, because I remember specifically that post show feeling of you've let yourself down, you've let other people down, you don't look like a bodybuilder anymore. And so I don't know. I guess it could be positive or negative, however, your personality takes it. But that stress of being kind of on all the time and then feeling like if you're not on, you're a failure. That would be
Yeah.
my concern.
I will say this, and this is a realization I had over probably the last like month or so, is if you're a person that struggles with self-image and you struggle with self-worth and you struggle a little bit with depression with that, you are really going to probably struggle post-show with things. Not saying you shouldn't compete, not saying you shouldn't do any of that, but that post-show depression is a real thing for people that are in a really good place mentally, who do have a lot of self-worth, who understand that this is a temporary feeling. It still is a struggle for for those people. But if you really struggle with that, post show is going to be harder for you than it is for some people. And a lot of people get into bodybuilding to help try to build up their self worth and to build up that self image. So just be aware of it. That's not to dissuade anyone from doing it, but you got to shine a light on an issue so you know it's there.
Yeah, agreed with that. Yeah, you have to set yourself up and be in a good spot. Not that there's ever going to be a perfect place to be in before prep, but if you're looking at going into a prep because you think it's going to help with like your self-worth or your, self-image, body image, whatever it is, I mean, prep may kind of put a band-aid on it for the time you're in prep, but you're probably going to spiral very much so in the opposite direction post show. Cause like you said, even people, or like you said, Evan, people who don't struggle with their body image or, don't struggle with their self-worth sometimes do struggle a little bit with those post show goals. So you just have to be aware and smart before you jump into a contest prep.
Yeah, and go into you'll think your eyes wide open too, and realizing this is something you're probably going to struggle with a little bit post show. Doesn't mean don't do it. Doesn't mean don't do it because it can teach you a lot and it can help you grow mentally with that. It can help you, but just being aware of it, I think is helpful.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think another thing too is like on that topic is people who get into like wanting to do a contest prep because they think that, it's going to be so cool to look stage lean and like that's their kind of goal. It's funny because like I remember before I competed kind of thinking that same thing. Not that that's why I got into it, but just kind of thinking like, "Oh my God, it's going to be so cool to see myself stage lean. I'm going to be the most confident I've ever been." And I don't know. I don't think it's just a me thing, but I know that like when I got stage lean, it was weird. It was like I wasn't my most confident. Yeah, it kind of looks cool, but you still like it's like, it's that concept of like, oh, I'll be happy when, and then you get there and you're like, okay, no, like I'm not as happy as I thought that I would be at this point. So that's something, interesting just to point out too.
No, I absolutely agree with you on that. Yes, I mean the whole reason I competed the first time was so I thought it would help and I wanted to look good, and it's the whole reason I did it the first time.
Yeah.
And obviously, I got there and I was like, wow, I'm not exactly. I was happy, very happy with how I looked, but it also didn't change how I felt.
Yeah. I just always remember like the first time I was ever exposed to competitors was the first gym I ever joined back in St. Louis. And I just like remember seeing them thinking like at the time, oh gosh, they're probably so confident, like with the way they look, etc. And then you get into it and you really realize that that's not always the case.
No,
Yeah, the least confident you are is at the end of prep because the way I explain it is at the beginning of prep, you see your strengths. You're like, oh, okay, I look good here, I look good there. At the end of prep, you only see your weaknesses. You only see that body fat that's like on the lower back or on the glute or wherever the area that's the only thing you see. You miss the big picture. Um, and so the focus tends to be switched. And so you got to be mentally tough. We all have pictures that we took in prep and looked at and immediately hated, and then looked at 6 months later and we're like, damn, I looked really good. What was wrong with my thinking? I remember looking at this picture and being mad. Um,
Yes.
yeah.
Yep.
That is definitely a real thing for sure, for sure. Well, any other thoughts on this topic about differences between younger versus older athletes, or do you guys want to move on to some other questions
I
that
mean, it depends on the goal of the athlete, but I think there's the two things to consider is the differences in pro cards. I have some masters athletes that are like, hey, I want to do a national show. I usually steer my masters, especially 40 and over, away from open national shows. I don't see them typically being rewarded as much. So we'll typically focus on that middle of the year, the July, August, when we have the universe, then we have the Masters Nationals, then we have North Americans, all within a short time frame. There is one more Masters Pro show coming up. But it's a standalone show, the Masters USA Championships. They only give pro cards to the overall winners. Now there are typically less competitors, but so that's one thing to consider with a Masters competitor. Their season has to be very well planned out if they're chasing a pro card.
Yep.
Yep. And even now with they've announced the Masters Olympia has a qualification. The last time they had the Masters Olympia 2 years ago, everyone applied and no one knew what the qualification process was. They just applied and then they made a selection committee, chose them. This time around, you have to win an over 40 pro show to go to the Masters Olympia. So
Oh,
I've
yeah,
already
smart.
had one athlete qualify. This weekend I'll have a couple more, taking a shot at it in Atlantic. So I think that's going to change the landscape for Masters competitors, is that excitement around, hey, let's try to get to the Masters Olympia in Tokyo, by the way. That's it. I mean, that's really the big difference, is like the from a coaching perspective, is the strategy around getting in front of judges, going to the nationals, getting your pro card, getting your Olympic qualification. It's just different for the Masters League.
Yeah.
And not saying too, you can't turn pro in the open. I mean, I know the guy that won like junior USAs or junior nationals, I can't remember one that won the overall there, walked in and then won a master show. Right after that.
I think for men, it's
I
a
think that was
little bit different. I think for men,
Yeah.
it's a little bit different. And I'm not saying that you can't as a female, but just in my experience, that it's more challenging.
I also feel like with older female clients too, something that you really do start to have to be aware of and really prioritize is like the skin texture, right? Like, and some people deal with it more than others. Like some people are just more genetically blessed with better skin as they age. Some people not as much. So that's something, I mean, as much as we could sit here and say it doesn't matter, it does at the end of the day. That skin elasticity, skin texture, so making sure you're doing everything you can to make that look as good and youthful as possible on stage as you age. I think that's another thing that becomes more vital as you do age in this sport.
For sure.
Yeah.
Perfect.
All right, well, do you guys have some other questions that you want to kind of get to with the remaining time of this podcast? Any good ones?
Yeah, I mean, we had some questions from our few Q&As that we didn't get to answer. And I don't know. The question that I didn't answer last time is, I don't know, did we discuss why some coaches remove salt and water?
We did
No,
not.
we have not.
Yeah, and so I wanted to touch base with that. I think when you know the history of the sport, cutting water and adjusting sodium, I think that probably started in the early periods of the sport where anabolics were heavily involved with the men. And so they absolutely had to manage that, right? Because the anabolics are going to change. And this is just me assuming, the change the way the body stores things. And then I think you get into the secondary phase of this sport where women are competing, and I don't think the women were getting as conditioned as they are now. And so if you reduce fluid intake and sodium temporarily, you will look a little bit leaner. You'll tighten up if you're not as lean, right? So you're going to look a little tighter. But what I find is that when you're actually stage conditioned, if you pull out water and sodium, you will start to look stringy and really flat and small.
Yep.
Because the muscle is primarily stored with water and glycogen, and sodium is a big transport for that. So yeah, that's where I've seen like girls will look really good a week out, and then they'll look really flat. You'll notice the tie-ins kind of go away. You'll notice the separation between the muscles, and that's because the muscle volume is just gone and it's not really protruding out. And so I think I think that's why some coaches do it. And I think there are times where you can actually manipulate a little bit and see an improvement. But I'd say the far majority, when you're making those big changes, it's you're hoping to like just time some stuff perfectly. And you can try to look 10% better and end up looking 80% worse.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think a lot of people struggle with that. A lot of people, look, if you are stage conditioned and you are flat on stage, and flat meaning like your sodium is low, your water's low, your food is low, then you will look like you are out of shape. You absolutely will look like you're out of shape. Now, what a lot of people get confused is they'll say, I was flat on stage. You can't be flat on stage if you aren't in stage condition. You can be flat. That's true. You can be, but that's not the reason you didn't look the way you wanted to look on stage. You still had too much body fat on you. For a lot of people, that's kind of the answer with that.
Yeah, I
Now,
feel like if you're not truly stage lean, no amount of sodium water manipulation is probably gonna help
no,
that. I mean,
it can help a little bit. Like it can, like if you still have some body fat, you try to maximize it as much as possible. But the goal should be always just be stage lean, right? Like that should always be the goal with that. And a lot of times, if you are stage lean and you start messing with stuff like that, it's not going to go well. Like you risk for 5% gain, you risk 20% of a look. And it doesn't make a lot of sense to do that. Like, why would you risk that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's where it comes from. And like changing those variables is going to change the physique. Like it just is.
Mhm.
And so, why do they do it? Sometimes you'll see somebody do that and they'll win the show. And, if you carry a ton of muscle, pulling water might not have a huge impact on you, but I'd say for the far majority, keeping those kind of things kind of stable, or at least managing them consistently. I do typically bring fluids down on show day just because I don't want my athletes like having to go pee all the time, or having like water belly. But if someone's drinking typically 100 and let's say 150 or 180 ounces of water a day, they're still going to have 100 ounces on show day. It's not like I'm pulling water out of the body. It's actually one of the things I look for on show day. If someone starts telling me they're going pee nonstop, I'm like, okay, that means we're going to be starting to flatten out real quick. We've got to replace those electrolytes and add some water back in.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
I think a reason too that it's not quite as prevalent now as people pulling water and people reducing sodium, I think is I think the diuretic use has come down a lot in this sport for the good with that too, which is a good positive sign. Um, at least in our circles we run in, I don't know that many people that, especially for the female divisions, especially for bikini, that really pull a lot of water or mess with sodium that much. Very rarely do I see. Now with some of the more local coaches, not to disparage anyone, but I do see more of it with that. So like if someone comes to me from a local coach, there is no carb loading, there is water cutting, and there is sodium manipulation in
yeah,
almost
and it's
every single one of
those
those.
coaches. What I find is they're giving kind of the same peak week protocol
Yeah.
to everybody. It's not like they're like, oh, you need to do this to look better. They're like, no, this is peak week. This is what
Yeah.
peak week is. Um, and I think that's kind of the accepted dogma, especially for a first time competitor. They're trusting their local coach, the guy in the gym um, that probably has some competitors placing, but doesn't probably have a long history of success at the higher levels of the sport or whatever it is. Yeah, that's just kind of the accepted approach. And that's usually, like I always say, I'm usually someone's second coach because
Yeah.
they go to the show, they realize they looked better a week before, they see an athlete of ours backstage eating and drinking like normal. Our athlete wins the show, and they're like, wait a second.
Well, it's interesting too because I feel like this is probably the most common question I've gotten as a bodybuilder from like people who know nothing about bodybuilding. This is just like a stereotype. I feel like I'll always get the question of like, oh, do you cut out water on show day? Do you cut out, like, you must be really thirsty? Like, this is a concept I feel like a lot of people, like Gen Pop people, just assume about bodybuilders that is
Mhm.
all cutting out.
Well, so I'll tell you where that comes from, because being around a long time, Lexi, I remember seeing like Ronnie Coleman on the Tonight Show. And he would talk about, yeah, I don't drink water from Thursday till Saturday night. Like they talk about that publicly. These are the most famous bodybuilders in the world. So that's where it kind of gets like accepted that that's the approach that we take. You know,
Makes
that's
sense.
that's where the mainstream stuff comes from. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I have a question that I want to answer because I like this one a lot. And it kind of is making me think. So somebody asked, what's everybody's favorite thing about coaching and also coaching prep clients specifically?
Go ahead, Evan.
My favorite thing is helping people reach places that they never thought they could get. To me, that's incredibly rewarding. For them to be really happy with the final package and for them to feel good too is just incredibly rewarding. It is. And to help people impact people's life in a positive way, because a lot of people can get in this sport and shit goes downhill for them in their personal relationships and their business life and everything else. I get a lot of joy out of making sure that stuff doesn't go by the wayside with that. Um, but also the fact that no, they worked really, really hard to get there.
What about you,
I mean,
Lex?
there's a bunch of other reasons too, but
Yeah, I mean, everything of what Evan said, yes, of course. I think one of my favorite things is, especially with prep, is especially like when you're taking a newer competitor or first time competitor, is seeing them like not only physically but mentally as a person, like transform throughout the process. Because I feel like if you are in a really good spot when you start prep and you're doing it for the right reasons, I mean, the physical growth is one thing, but like the mental growth can be really astounding. You know, you become usually a lot more confident just as a person. You become more self-aware. And that can bleed very positively into other areas of life. Like I've had clients that, will tell me, oh my gosh, I got this job that I've been wanting to go after for so long. And I don't think I would have tried to go after it if it weren't for, the confidence that I instilled in prep, or even just the discipline that somebody goes through in prep. I think that that can bleed so positively in other areas of one's life outside of bodybuilding, whether it's their relationships, whether it's their careers, just, how they carry themselves as a person. So I think that's one of my favorite things as a competitor, is just seeing clients kind of grow and thrive in that sense over time.
Yeah, my absolute favorite moment of coaching is when a competitor starts to doubt themselves, right? So like let's say we go to a show, they get second or they don't win the overall, whatever it is, they just go, oh. And I can see right away they're having that question of like, wow, do I even continue? Um, and then they come back and they go, tell me what I have to do. Like, tell me what I have to do. And then they get their win the next time out, because that's a moment that you don't get without, kind of fighting that personal battle of wanting to quit on the goal. It's like, that's what I always say about the sport. You find out who's a real competitor when they get punched in the mouth the first time, right? That's when you find out. You'll find out who you are as a person. If you'll jump ship from your coach, if you're going to be loyal, if you're going to, whatever it is that you're going to do, that's the moment where you go, okay, it's like a self check. And so like one of my favorite moments ever is Kathy Seitz. She won the overall at the Clash in 2022. It's 21, maybe 21. She won the overall at the Clash. By all intents, she's going to Junior USA's to get her pro card, because she just won a big show in front of Sandy. And a few weeks later, we go to Junior USA's. She gets ninth. Now we were really flat. We underestimated how much she needed to fill out. So she wasn't at her best, but still, overall to ninth at your show. She was like, I think I'm done. I put my heart and my soul into this. And I thought, okay, she might be done. And then a couple days later, she's like, all right, we're skipping junior nationals and I'm going to do universe, because that was in July. Gave us a couple more weeks. And then, we just did all the things. We made sure we tested her peaking. We got better. I got better as a coach. She got better as an athlete, and she got her pro card and won the overall at universe. That moment could have never happened if she just said, hey, I've had enough. Right. And that personal struggle is, like, for me, the most exciting thing, because you see people overcome their own self-doubts. I have a great video of her crying her eyes out, and we're hugging, and I'm probably crying too. It's like, just knowing that she went through that. So that's what's the great thing about the sport. Why do I like coaching competitors? Because competitors are like, they're like in a lab setting, right? It's like a metabolic ward. You have somebody add 20 grams of carbs, they add 20 grams of carbs. You tell somebody to do more cardio, they do more cardio. You tell somebody to take a day off, they take a day off. You literally learn that, how the body responds as a coach in prep. And it's just amazing, especially when you see those results play out, because after doing this a decade, I'm way better than I was, and I'm still learning, but it's that education is something that I've been able to do because I only coach competitors. When you coach people from all walks of life, it can be a little frustrating when you're like, hey, you didn't check in this week. Oh, sorry, someone was in town. I didn't do this. I didn't do that. And you're like, all right, well, what's my value here? I'm not even valuable to you.
Right. Yeah. I think that, and then this isn't just competitors, but that is a very common trait, I feel like, amongst good competitors, is that they will check in regardless. Like, it doesn't matter if, gosh, I have a client right now on a cruise and she still always manages to like check in on her cruises. And it's just like, when there is a will, there is a way with a lot of these athletes.
Yep.
And I think a really cool thing too, Paul, is the fact that, and I know we appreciate this as a coach too, is sometimes you don't nail it, right? Sometimes you don't. And like you said with Kathy, you did the one show, then the next show, her body was in a different spot. She was a little flat. And some competitors after that be like, hey, I put everything into this, is a bad experience. Like, I'm going to go somewhere else, or I'm going to do this on my own. Instead, gave it another shot and ended up going very, very well. Right. So if your coach listens and your coach pays attention to things, understand that if things don't go well, we will learn something from that experience to be able to improve into the next shows with it. It's invaluable data too. It is. Look, no one's perfect. No one nails it perfect every single time. And there could be a million. That's the coolest thing about bodybuilding. And the worst thing about bodybuilding is there's a million factors that can play into to impact the look in a physique. A million different factors on there. I mean, I had a girl wake up today whose food was same as it has been, hadn't changed anything, was up 4 pounds. Right? I mean, sometimes things happen. We got to figure it out.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. The human body is funny, and sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and then a couple days will go by, and then they'll be like, "Oh, by the way, I'm sick." Oh,
Right. Or,
you did.
you know, I just started my cycle or something like that.
Yep.
Oh, Lexi, that's what I was going to say. I can't tell you how many times I get this. I don't know. My weight went up. And then you go back and forth, try to troubleshoot. It's like, oh, well, I forgot my cycle's about to start. It's like, well, that probably should have been the main thing you brought
Exactly.
up to
And
begin with.
you know what's funny? So I have a really like creepy intuition. There's like I won't get into it. Like have a weird intuition, and a lot of times I'm sure you guys kind of notice this too. Like you'll get female clients that check in, and maybe they're not on their cycle yet, but like they're just like kind of you can tell in the tone of their check-in. Like this is not this like who this person normally is. They're just kind of more negative about the way they look and blah blah blah. And I'm always like, okay, I think they're about to start their cycle. And more oftentimes than not, the next week they'll be like, oh yeah, I started my cycle. And I'm like, well, that explains your behavior last week or how you were feeling last week. But yeah, the cycle that explains a lot of things.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you guys want to do like one or two more questions?
Yeah. I'm good. If you got something.
You have any more, Lexi?
Evan, do you have any, or do you want me to bring up one of mine? Because I have.
No, bring up one of yours. I don't have anything up. I'm useless.
Okay, so this kind of goes along with similar to what Paul's question was, but this person asked if we cut out artificial sweeteners in prep or dairy, and if so, when. So I feel like this is going to be one of those like it depends questions, unfortunately. But do you guys have like a straightforward answer for this?
I think me and Evan might be slightly different on this. So I'm a pretty firm believer in if you're having something every day and your digestion's good, you're probably good to go. So both of those would be in that category. I think there is a high percentage of people that have an issue with dairy, and one thing about prep is that as your calories get lower and your cardio gets higher, your digestive system slows down a bit. Foods that may have been great at one point, they're now in contact with your body longer, and so I think there is an increase for a reaction or some kind of inflammation. But I don't tell athletes, say, hey, you have to completely cut out artificial sweeteners all of peak week. I just say, let's pay attention. And if you're noticing anything, I definitely cut out some carbonation the day before the show. But yeah, I don't like athletes having like tons of, what's that ice cream with all the erythritol?
Oh, Halo Top.
Halo Top. I noticed a big problem with that, and I noticed a problem with some whey proteins that are like have a lot of artificial sweeteners, and I don't know if it's the protein or the artificial sweeteners. The fact that whey is derived from milk, so I will try to go more whole food in peak week. But I've had some people pull out their whey and their yogurt a couple days out, and they're like, "Coach, my digestion's a mess." I'm like, "Put it back." So it really is. That's why we send out the questionnaire for peak week. What are you eating? Because I don't want to give them something they're not eating. I don't want to throw a bunch of stuff at them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I look at it. It matters way more if you're stage conditioned, way more. But I look at let's reduce anything that could possibly impact your digestion in a negative way. And artificial sweeteners, for the vast majority of people, do not help your digestion in any way. So let's remove those at least on Wednesday. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, typically it's about 48 hours that should all be out of your system anyways. Anything that was infecting your digestion in a negative way, we don't have to worry about that anymore with that. So that's my main reason for it. Look, some people handle lactose totally fine. And if that's the case, cool. Rock and roll with that. Protein, I don't think most people handle protein well. Like very, very few people actually do. So I think removing that can just help. But like you said, sometimes you have situations like that where people do digest it well and they need it in there. And if that's the case, cool, rock and roll, keep it in. That's no problem at all with it. But I think removing anything that could possibly impact your digestion in a negative way is helpful for that. But look, I have one person that is like about to pass out at work and they literally hate coffee. They don't want to drink coffee. They don't want to take caffeine. They don't want to do anything like that. They were like one Celsius a day. Okay. It's
Yeah. It,
we don't need to make the next 3 days so miserable for you you can't function, right? Like, is
right.
it going to make that big of a difference? It's not going to make that big of a difference. But if we can get away with pulling it, let's pull it. At least for the last 3 days.
I mean, honestly, sometimes those like an energy drink or diet soda, like that can be your saving grace the last week or two of prep. Now, of course, like what you guys said, I generally try to stay away from those things like a day or two out from show. I mean, person dependent. But you don't need to make yourself unnecessarily miserable by pulling something out that just is not going to make an impact. I've done both things. Like I've had times where I've literally pulled out like everything artificial. And then I've had times where, of course, I'm not like overdoing the artificials, but I don't cut it out as severely leading up to show day. And to be very honest, I've never noticed a difference with myself. If anything, having a little bit of something left in, whether it's an energy drink or so, like it's my saving grace. So I think this is very person dependent, but I will say I do see, and a lot of my competitors, we do end up cutting out dairy eventually, or just cutting it back severely. I had a client recently, and she, she emailed me, and she was really struggling with like her digestion. She wasn't going to the bathroom as frequently, so she sends over her food log, and I look at it, and she's, eating copious amounts of dairy various times throughout the day. So I'm like, let's, we don't need to cut it out, but let's cut it back. And what do you know? Within like 2 days, she's back to normal. So I do see dairy being a very common variable that will either pull back significantly or just pull out.
And look, there's a big difference between having like 1 Celsius a day and then having 1 Celsius for a mountain or for diet-free sodas, and then a pack of gum, and then protein on top of that. There is a big difference between a little bit and then literally just abusing it too.
And I think that does become an issue with a lot of competitors. Like deeper into prep is a lot of competitors, we have kind of that type A obsessive mentality, right? So you start to have one thing with artificials, and then it's like it very well can spiral into way too much, right? Like maybe you started with 2 pieces of gum a day, and then that can spiral into 2 packs a day. Like I think that happens with a lot of competitors, where it's like they start with a conservative amount of something and then they take it way too far, and that's when it definitely can become an issue. And I know we've talked about it on this podcast before about how a lot of people look at artificials as means of like chasing fullness, having the sparkling waters, having the gum, like it's a way to sometimes help to kind of occupy yourself and stay full. But at the end of prep, that's not a time where you need to be focused on trying to just be full all the time. Like it's okay to learn to live a little bit with that hunger.
Well, let me ask you this, Lexi, too. Have y'all ever had a competitor that really fought to stay full that was as conditioned as they needed to be?
They fought to stay full? What do you mean?
Yeah, like we're so focused on feeling full.
Like digestion wise, like they wanted
Yeah,
to be.
like their stomach was full. Like they ran away from hunger as much as they could. Food's in a fine place, cart is in a fine place, but they chased that feeling of feeling full.
No, I mean, honestly, I think every competitor that gets stage lean chases the feeling of hunger.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah,
That's
I've
it.
never had that. I've never had clients vocalize that issue to me. But yeah, I don't think I personally like feeling the hunger and prep. If I'm not hungry, that's when I almost start to worry, like, is something off? Like, what's going on? So yeah,
Something is off.
yeah, most of the time.
If your food's low and your cart is pretty high and you don't have hunger, something's not working.
Right.
Something's
I
not
realized
off.
I realized once I drank uh a regular soda. Like I was supposed to drink a Diet Coke and I drank the wrong one. Or maybe that like the fast food place had put the wrong soda in my cup or something. And I went back and I was like, oh, I was like, why am I not hungry? It was deep into prep and it was because I had like, a bunch of carbs.
That is
Mhm.
like one of my worst fears. I kid you,
Yeah.
anytime I go to a coffee shop too, like if I ask for sugar-free syrup, I will try to like,
You're watching them.
oh, I will. Like I'll lock eyes, and then they'll hand me the drink, and I'll always like I'll always specify like, this is the sugar-free syrup, right? And they'll be like, yes. And I'm like crossing my fingers. But yeah, I have such a fear that because I've heard of instances. I've had a client tell me
Yeah.
once that she used to work at like a fast food place, and she said they did that all the time. They would give people regular soda versus diet and then just not really care. So
I won't even do stuff like that in prep. I won't do it.
even
I won't even get anything out of like a gas station, out of a fountain machine, because I'm worried they're going to mix the bags up, but because I don't care.
I
I
was
won't do it.
literally just going to say that because at Wawa, they have like that amazing fountain machine of like, they have so many 0-calorie, sugar-free options that I've like never even heard of. But I'm just honestly kind of terrified to try them because you just never know what the workers are going to feel like, putting in that day. So yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. But do you guys have any other questions that you want to chat about before we wrap this up? Or do you guys want to end it
I
there?
feel like the questions that I want to address right now, I want to get more information on it. We've had a lot of requests to talk about PEDs. And so I think that's a really good topic. I also think the topic of discussing the shift in the sport, the addition of the natural shows, and what that landscape looks like. Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of interesting things coming up, because I know some things, and maybe I think you guys, we've talked about it off, the podcast, about what's happening. We know some things that are going on with the sport that the general population doesn't know, that doesn't know
Yeah.
the promoters and the shows and the schedules and all those things. So I think there's going to be a lot of interesting things coming up around that. So I want to hold off on those topics until I have all the information. But I think it would be a good time to stop, because I don't have any questions that are
Good.
burning a hole right now, competitor wise. And I think this weekend's going to answer a lot of questions. It's going to be, Angelica's going to be in Fort Lauderdale. The Ben Weider is going to happen. So we're going to see a couple new natural bikini pros, a couple, at least, well, is it one? Yeah, one bikini Olympian is going to come out of that show, right? So last year it was Brittany Schulman. So yeah, I think this is a good time for people to ask us questions. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, we love the questions, you guys, whether it's shoot us a DM or I think probably the best way to get your questions across, comment on our YouTube. We always look at those. But I wish I could sit here and say if you're going to be in Fort Lauderdale this weekend, we'll see you there. But obviously this will be out on Monday. So hopefully it'll be a good weekend for you, Paul.
I have no doubt. I have like I said, I have 21 athletes competing. So
Also who is on, so obviously by the time this is out, we'll have an answer, but somebody else who is on the list for Atlantic is obviously Angelica, but Romina's also on the list too.
well, I always say you're only as good as your last show.
For sure.
And Romina, I love her. One of the top bikini pros of all time. She was not on for her last show. So yeah, that's been 5 or 6 weeks. It's got to been that long, right? I mean, so I'm just hoping she brings her A game, because when she's on, she's as good as there is, and you don't like to see that. So I'll be curious.
Yeah, it'll be a fun weekend.
Yeah, and then I didn't see who's on the Hawaii list, but
It is, so I did look at that at a glance. Let me pull it up. It is, so it
there was
so it has, it's
there
not,
was a bunch of girls at the muscle contest show. The girl that got second, I'm sure she's itching. It was Woo B.
okay,
She's
she is in this show. So she's
yeah.
in the show. There's like 12 girls on the list. Brittany Gillespie is one of
Yep.
those. So she'll be there. Zoe Panzarino is doing this show too. She thinks she's had, and she's one of Dylan's clients. I think she's had a top 5 placing at
Is
this.
she? Okay.
Yeah, she's been doing consecutively better and better. So be curious to see how she does. So yeah, it's like 12 girls on the list. So
Cool.
yeah.
Yeah, so spread out over 3 shows. This is one of those weekends where it's great to get on stage, because you're thinning the herd a bit as far as like top, so there's going to be 3. Well, Angelica, I believe, is still qualified for life.
Yes.
So if she wins, technically they won't be adding her to the list, but I don't even know how that works anymore. So as many as 3 new Olympians this weekend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Get your Olympic qualification. That's about it. Is this the last weekend? Is there one more show?
Well, so there's going to be nationals in Texas, and
No,
then
I meant as far as Olympia qualifications go.
oh, for this year. Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
As far
I
as
don't think in the States.
yeah, in the States.
yeah.
Yeah. So it'll be a fun weekend.
Yep.
Also find out if Chris Bumstead beats Martin, which is not going to happen, but be interesting to see.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing, because even if he does that mean he comes back and does another show? Because as I would understand it, the reason he's retiring is, he's won 6 consecutive Olympias, no longer putting his health at risk. I think if you go to open bodybuilding, it's not like he's gonna do less.
No, he said if he won, he said he wouldn't count out doing the Olympia next year in the Open. He said that the other day. He didn't say yes or no. He's on Fuad's podcast. They asked him straight up. He's like, I don't know. So,
I mean, has he had enough time to change his physique enough to be competitive in the Open?
I mean, we'll see. I mean, if Martin wasn't in the show, he probably could win. But Martin's in the show, so
yeah. Martin just got
top
4th.
4 Olympian. Yeah,
and Martin's never
off.
been off. I've never seen Martin off.
No, be interesting to see though.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll have lots to talk about for next Monday's podcast.
Yes, we will. All right. Bye, guys.
All right. Talk to you soon.